Hi, this is Christopher Smith, publisher of the American Cannabis Report, and I'm lucky today to have Peter Sue of Green Check Verified with me today. Hi, Peter. How you doing?
Hi, Christopher. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, great to have you. I wanted to start out by just remembering between the two of us how we met, actually. It's just a classic LinkedIn introduction kind of a thing, and your name popped up, and I saw your title, which I didn't think I would ever really see before. and so I reached out to you immediately and said, listen, I've got to talk to you, dude. What is that title about? So your title says Cannabis Banking Executive. And I didn't think that species existed. So that's why I had to reach out and find out what's going on here. Tell me a little bit about what you do. Tell me about your background and sort of how you got to where you are.
Sure. So my species does exist.
Okay.
I was, up until recently, a longtime banker, 25 years in banking, HSBC, Signature Bank, Dime, and East West. And for the last several years of my life, I was running cannabis banking programs. So I do come in with a lot of banking experience, and specifically cannabis banking. I am now with Green Check Verified, which is a software. We empower banks that want to bank cannabis banking by helping them alleviate some of the pressures associated with the regulatory burden of cannabis banking, which I know you're excited to get into.
Well, it's just like I said, all the news will tell you, that there is no banking. Cannabis companies are unbanked, that we're dealing with cash only. We have big vaults and safes and armed guards and that have to pay our taxes and all this stuff. And that's the news that we're getting. And I'm not sure if it's just my algorithm that keeps feeding me this stuff, but it seems to be general in the news coverage, really, that safe banking is the thing that's talked about all the time. We can't get safe banking through, therefore there is no banking. But you're telling me quite a different story, really. You're telling me that actually lots of cannabis companies are banked and they're doing just fine. Thank you very much.
Well, the idea that banking is not available in cannabis is a little bit of a myth. If you look around, the industry is banked, right? 90% of the industry is banked. Now, it is underbanked. In fact, there was a recent study by Whitney Economics where they, essentially polled a bunch of frontline cannabis operators, and 72% of respondents said that banking was their number one concern. 72% ranked it ahead of taxes as their number one concern, right? Yep. Now, what do I mean by underbanked? Well, Chris, you and I talked about this, which is, capability, capacity, and costs. So predominantly in the industry, there's smaller banks. We're talking, tiny credit unions, community banks, sub-$1 billion, let's say. So a couple of things happen. Sometimes it's just what they're willing to do, what they're able to do. And then, of course, the costs. It is expensive. So if you're seeing that there are certain companies that are not banked, like they're just existing in cash only, it's possible that's intentional. They don't want to pay thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars for a checking account. Okay.
So you had described to me, which I found fascinating. You told me exactly why cannabis banking is so, well, there's two things really. One is why it's so complicated, why it's so difficult from your side, from the banker side, why it's so hard to manage cannabis accounts, number one. And then two, why it's so expensive for cannabis clients to have bank accounts. And, as I mentioned, it feels, just again, in the legend out here, it feels like the banks are taking advantage of cannabis companies. They're grinding them. They know that they've got them. And so they're going to jack up the fees and everything. But what you've described is really quite a different scenario. So why is it so difficult, first of all, from your side, from the cannabis banker side?
Sure. Yeah. So, the obvious here is that, look, it is federally illegal, right? And so by definition, every dollar is technically money laundering. And that, of course, is a primary responsibility that the bank has, is to prevent money laundering.
So can I just interject real quick, just in case someone's listening who doesn't really know the whole thing? So number one, cannabis is on Schedule 1 of the Drug Enforcement Agency's Schedule of Controlled Substances. because of that, that's where it is federally illegal on Schedule 1. And
Right.
because banks are federally insured through the FDIC, then the banks have to operate as if this is federally illegal. And because of that, they have to do, I think, what's it called, a SARS report? Tell me that again.
Yeah. So again, sure. So again, it's federally illegal, and therefore, when you have money coming in, there's actually a specific report that a bank has to fill out as a SAR, a suspicious activity report. There are 3 SARs that apply to marijuana specifically. So if we walk through just mentally what that would mean, you need to now track every dollar. You need to be able to show that every dollar that's being deposited in your bank can somehow be traced to a dollar's worth of state legal goods, right? You need to file reports after reports after reports, right? And when the regulators come, you know they will heavily examine this portion of your book. So it's laborious and it can be expensive. It's expensive because if you think about what it would take to do that, you have to really staff up to manage these accounts. Now, in the early days, the only option available was to throw bodies at it, so the industry average, and look, these are very, sliding scales, right? Like everyone's gonna have a different feeling about it, but let's just say it's somewhere in the middle of 5 to 8. So for every 5 to 8 cannabis businesses, you would need to hire 1 BSA personnel, whether that's an analyst, an officer, et cetera. Okay. Now, extrapolate that math out, right? Imagine having 100 cannabis businesses. You would have to have an army of BSA analysts just to manage this one program of this one particular vertical of your bank. And mind you, you have a whole bank. You don't just do cannabis, right? Right. And FDIC standards, I mean, for a $5 billion bank, they would assume that you have maybe 500 people working in the bank. You might have 500 people working just to have a cannabis banking program. Wow. So again, in the early days, that's the reason why a lot of banks got in and then got out, because it was just too much work. And then again, in the early days, that's the reason why you hear stories where people were paying $10,000 a month for just to have a checking account. Now, that said, that doesn't mean that the banks aren't squeezing, because hey, it's a for-profit business. Like, are they tagging on a certain amount of money? Probably, but there is a real cost associated with it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And just for context, if you don't mind repeating, so we talked about how you said about, let's say, 20 analysts for about 100 cannabis clients, let's say, or something sort of in that general area. But now, if we could understand the scale of normal businesses, like normal, not scheduled businesses, right? Not federally legal businesses, what would the ratio be for that?
Oh, sure. It would be a huge difference. So just going by a live example, one of the banks I worked for was roughly a $5 to $6 billion entity. There was about 500 people in the company altogether. And we had a BSA department of less than 10 people. Okay. Yeah.
And do you remember at all how many clients you had? I'm trying to just sort of do apples to apples.
I don't know if it's just a specific number, because again, things are measured by dollar amounts rather than number. But if I had to guess, I would say we had well over 20,000 accounts, let's say.
Wow. So anyway, just to summarize, really, it's the scale of work that it takes to manage cannabis accounting and reporting is really it's a giant difference, and that's why it's so difficult. Yeah. And so many banks will just simply not take it on. So that's one of the reasons why banking's not really available, because it's so complicated, so expensive for the bank. They have to staff up, they have to pay benefits, desks, computers, the whole show, for every single one of those extra employees.
Yeah, and here's one of the things. Like, let's say you do that. You hire 20 BSA officers, analysts to manage your program. Well, that's it. You're committed, right? You can't just, if you decided to scale down, you can't just get rid of 20 people. I guess you could, but
well, but you've invested in their training. You've invested in all of the stuff you do when you have human resources, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, so that, and I hope I'm not skipping ahead, but that's where companies like us come in. So we
Okay.
provide a software. And what we do is we alleviate some of the burdens that's associated with this entire process that we're talking about. So thinking about going through transaction monitoring, checking licenses, background checks, So there's a set of guidelines that FinCEN publishes. It's from 2014. It's based on the Cole memo. And it is
Right.
fairly clearly lays out what a bank, a financial institution would have to do if they're going to bank cannabis. Believe it or not, it's actually pretty literal. It literally says, if you're banking cannabis, make sure you do this,
Okay.
So again, to circle all the way back, there's a set of guidelines that any bank can follow. So any bank can bank cannabis.
Right.
Our software, what it does is it automates a lot of that process so that you can manage your program with far less resources. And we're talking tenfold, right? Like I mentioned, where I mentioned that 5 to 8, perhaps ratio, right? Well, we have clients that could be managing, let's say 50 accounts, 60 accounts with one person, as opposed to, 5 or 8 accounts with one person.
That's a huge advantage. Wow. That's great.
Huge. Yeah.
Hey, can I just take a little sidetrack for a second? I'm noticing, I'm pretending that I'm not, but I'm actually looking at your LinkedIn page over your shoulder here. And I noticed across the top, there's a picture of you and you're in camouflage. It looks like northern camouflage, not desert camouflage, but northern sort of woods oriented, the green kind. It looks like you've got maybe an M4 over your shoulder, and it looks like you've got a beret on. So tell me a little bit about that background. Were you in the military as well?
I was, Army aviation. So when I tell people that, I think they get really surprised. So I worked on turbine engines. I'm a turbine engine specialist.
Wow. Okay.
So in the Army, that means helicopters.
Oh, wow. Fascinating. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your service. I have to say, I didn't have the privilege of serving myself, so I really appreciate that you put yourself on the line, basically put yourself at risk for us. I really do appreciate that.
Thank you. Yeah.
So I want to make sure I acknowledge that, because we hadn't discussed it before, but thank you. And there's another funny thing on your resume. What is it now? Rolling Stone Culture Council. Tell me about that. How does the banker guy get involved with Rolling Stone? It's pretty great.
At the risk of sounding slightly boastful, I think I'm pretty well known in the cannabis space, and specifically the cannabis banking space.
It's because you're the only one. Yeah.
I am a select species, apparently.
Yes, right.
Well, I'm on the NCIA banking committee. I chair the New York City Cannabis Industry Association banking committee. I'm a treasurer for the Asian Cannabis Roundtable, and so I was invited. Rolling Stones has these culture councils, and it means simply that I can be a thought leader, publish articles through Rolling Stone. So thought leadership about cannabis, and if you think about Rolling Stones, it's more cultural. So it's about discussing the cultural issues surrounding cannabis.
Well, I hope when you do publish, I hope you'll let me know so that I can republish and make sure that I help spread the word. In our community, because like I said, you're unique, unusual. You are so you understand the space so clearly and so differently from everything that I've heard. So anyway, I was super happy to meet you, and super happy that you reached back and said, sure, I'll tell you about banking. Of course, So anyway.
Yeah.
Very grateful to find out everything. Now, you just mentioned say it again, the Chinese.
Asian Cannabis Roundtable. Yeah.
Pardon me.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. Tell me about what that's about. What you're doing.
No, thank you. I appreciate that opportunity to talk about our message. And diversity is such a big issue now, especially in cannabis. It's talked about a lot because there's an interesting dynamic, right? For years, decades, it was illegal, and now it's legal. But you turn around and you see all these people in prison for something that now is legal.
Yes. Right.
And the Asian Cannabis Roundtable, where we are really focused on the idea of bringing voice, the Asian voice, which is not, we're not a very vocal minority group. And we really want to bring the Asian population to the table to be heard, talk about our thoughts, our ideas, and put our stamp on the cannabis industry.
Good. Well, I really do believe that in this industry, I believe that diversity is the strength of the industry. I really firmly believe this because I think that when people are interested in the plant, it cuts across all the barriers that people ordinarily abide by. It breaks down all those barriers, builds bridges between whether it's a gender thing or ethnic thing or geographical or whatever the differences are, whatever the teams are that people are playing on. Cannabis cuts across all those things. Yeah. And so I'm really glad to hear that you're sort of working in the space and to make sure that you're heard. I think that's critically important.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. And thank you for the opportunity to talk about it. I'm glad that you asked.
Yeah, great. Well, fantastic. Now, is there anything, Peter, that I missed or didn't talk about? Anything else you'd like to speak about today? Because I may have forgotten or just not known to ask.
Well, no, so I think if there's one thing to be taken away from, hopefully the takeaway here is that, look, cannabis banking is available. And if you are a cannabis business that is struggling with your banking, and, it's lately it's become a big topic with, robberies and such, Washington, California, Oregon are all, you've probably seen the news stories where, because people know there's a lot of cash at these businesses, and mind you, there's cash and marijuana, right? Robberies are very high. Please reach out. We're not a bank, but our partners are, our clients are. So we would love to get you placed, help you with your banking situation.
Well, that's wonderful. I wonder if the media strategy of if it bleeds, it leads, whenever a robbery happens, it's reported as a crime wave. So I'm not so sure that it's not really quite the Wild West out here. On the West Coast where everything is getting knocked over and everything, there were some robberies and some have happened. But in the same week, there were massive robberies of department stores. And this sort of strange new strategy of 100 people arriving in 100 cars, ripping everything they can out of the store and then leaving in 100, like this massive attack kind of thing. So not only cannabis, sometimes these things, well, like cannabis banking itself, as a matter of fact, there's some misinformation out there. So anyway, well, but I would certainly appreciate seeing us meet in the middle anyway, and getting more banking availability to cannabis clients or cannabis companies out here, right? And then services like yours that increase the efficiency 10 times, is going to be good for everyone, I think. Absolutely. Peter, I really appreciate your time today. I don't know if we stuck to our schedule. I guess we probably did. We did pretty well. But I know you've got to get back to work, and I feel like very fortunate to have had your time today. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Chris.